Hello and welcome back to Deb's Creative Images. I am Debbie Quick, and today I wanted to share with you a presentation that I gave at a local photography group about wintering raptors at the Shawangunk Grasslands National Wildlife Refuge. The reason the Shawangunk Grasslands is a popular destination point for wintering raptors is because it has a unique grassland habitat where they can rest and also feed off the adequate supply of voles, as well as other rodents that are running around in the tall grasses. The most common migrating winter raptors we see are northern harriers and short-eared owls, and these birds, they fly down from the Arctic tundra, which is a very long journey for them. So it's nice that they have a good place to rest and feed. We also will sometimes see loggerhead shrikes, rough-legged hawks, peregrine falcons, bald eagles, American kestrels. So there are other birds that tend to fly through, but the harriers and the owls, we can guarantee to see them every winter. There are a few different viewing options to observe these beautiful raptors. You can do so either from the parking lot or from the observation platform and gazebo area, which is just to the right of the parking lot. There is also a 3-mile long loop around the grasslands, but they do close that in the winter to protect the owls and the hawks from the crowds. And there are 5 observation blinds, which are available first come, first serve, but this past year they did remove those blinds, also to protect the raptors from the crowds. So one of the things I like to remind people when they go to the grasslands is, the wildlife comes first, always protect them, and to please follow proper etiquette, which means no bird calling, no trying to bait them, just use your judgment. There are signs around as well. And then if you're interested, here is the link for the Friends of the Shawangunk Grasslands National Wildlife Refuge. Just like any other type of photography, there are challenges when you're at the grasslands photographing owls and hawks. And one of them is obtaining and keeping focus on the subject. The background is very busy and the grasses are tall and the birds move pretty fast. The other challenge is finding a quiet place. If it gets too crowded, it tends to get too noisy, and the harriers and owls, they tend not to like the noise as much. Some years anyway. Other years it hasn't bothered them, but it is good to keep the noise down when they're flying. And then, of course, lighting conditions. You never know what you're going to get when you get out there. Sometimes there's changing light. Other times we're dealing with the typical winter gloom of the Northeast. And then the last challenge in this area is that the owls tend not to fly until it's too dark. So that's a big challenge. You get there early and you hope for the best. But sometimes you wind up standing around waiting and waiting and waiting. And you get to that point of the day where you're just like watching that sun get further and further down. And a lot of times you'll notice that you won't see them until you're really losing the light. And then the last challenge that I face there is heat shimmer. Oftentimes before 2 p.m., the ground is warmer than the air, and so it does give that shimmer, which can be difficult when photographing other subjects. Next, I would like to share with you some of my go-to settings. On a sunny day, I like to have my shutter really fast, roughly 25/100th of a second or faster. And my sweet spot for my aperture is around 7.1. But if there are multiple birds in the frame, I might want it to be maybe around 8. And sometimes I use an auto ISO, and sometimes I manually choose my ISO. Then on an overcast day with decent light, you know, my typical settings would be around 2,000th of a second with an aperture between 5.6 or 6.3, and then my ISO around 1000 to 1250. But then once the light starts to diminish, I call these my desperate settings, because then I just start dropping the shutter as necessary. I open my aperture up at 5.6, which is the best that I can do with what I'm shooting with. And then my ISO winds up being much higher, 2500 or 3200. And I see I have a typo here that I need to fix. But then I get into really desperate settings where I'm using an ISO of 5,000 or so. In that type of situation, the bird needs to be really close if your shot's going to look any decent. Now let's talk a little bit about the northern harriers. They are a distinctive hawk, and they have long wings and long tail feathers. They do tend to fly low over the ground in open field meadows, and they rely on their hearing to locate their prey. Their habitat is generally marshes or fields and prairies. They like wet and dry habitat with good ground cover. And then their diet consists of small birds as well as rodents. And the harriers, they do tend to fly throughout the day. So you don't have to wait until just before dark to see them. They're usually up and about throughout the day. So now I'm going to go into some example shots of some harriers. You can see here that it was a day with decent light because I have a nice fast shutter speed. My aperture is around 6.3, and I do have an ISO of 1600, and I did that particularly so that I can have that faster shutter speed. In this shot here, I had the luxury to focus on two harriers at once, and I got some pretty cool shots of them in action. That's really fun. And you know, if you look at my settings closely, you can see again that I had some really good light when they were flying around and putting on a show. So here is another harrier who gave me an opportunity in really nice light. But you can see that this one is lower to the ground, and so some of the weeds that were closer to the hawk are somewhat fuzzy, somewhat in focus. But what I really like is how I have a nice bokeh on the background behind this hawk so that it really focuses in on the hawk. And now this here is a shot of a gray ghost, and this is a male northern harrier, and I was so thrilled that he was sitting on this post as I was driving into the refuge in beautiful light, so I didn't even have to get out of my car to take this shot. And here he is again. I sat there for a little bit, and he had taken off from the post, and I was able to get a shot of him with the beautiful light hitting his underneath feathers. So again, you can see that he's low to the ground, and I have some really nice bokeh in the background. Now let's take a look at what we've all been waiting for, the short-eared owls. These guys are much easier to spot than most owls because they can often be found in open terrain. They do roost on the ground, but they will fly up to trees, nest boxes, as well as posts when they are in their hunting mode. And they do tend to fly low over the ground and will often hover over prey while they are hunting. Their habitat in the summer, it consists of prairies, marshes, dunes, as well as tundra. And in the winter, they prefer stubble fields, meadows, coastal dunes, as well as shrubby areas. And their diet is very similar to the northern harrier, where they mostly like rodents. When they are up in the Arctic tundra, they have lemmings. And then, you know, when they're traveling down in the northeast, they tend to hunt voles as well as small mice and other small rodents. such as rabbits, gophers, bats, muskrats, and birds. And they sometimes will hunt during the day, but mostly it is around dawn and dusk. Here you can see that I got this short-eared owl in flight in the sky, and not only by the looks of the picture, but also by my settings, you can tell that I had gorgeous light that was hitting the whole underside of this beautiful owl. And here is another shot in gorgeous light on a beautiful sunny day, and this shot here focuses on the top side of the owl. So you can see how their top side is browner, while their bottom side of their wing feathers, those are lighter, more of a white with some brown speckles in there. And just like with the harriers, it's really fun to watch the owls when they are interacting with each other. And oftentimes this happens when one has food and the other one is trying to chase them and steal their food away, which honestly, they wind up losing more meals because of those chases instead of just going out and catching their own food. But again, this was another shot that we had some really good light, and I was able to catch 2 owls in the frame. And this one here I got a few years ago before they took the blinds out, and I was standing right next to a blind, kind of using it as a shelter to hide myself, and this owl flew and landed on the post that was right there in front of me. I just couldn't believe it. I was afraid to even breathe because I didn't want to startle the owl. The light was perfect. Sadly, though, the owl didn't stay long. As soon as the owl heard the sound of my shutter, it looked over at me and off it went. But at least it stayed long enough for me to get a few shots in the series. And this shot here is another one with gorgeous late afternoon light. And you can see that the owl is close to the ground. So I'm getting some pretty decent bokeh. But the thing I like most about this is that this owl is looking directly at me, and that sun is just hitting this owl's eyes. So I just love this photo for those reasons. And then, of course, the best time to go and photograph the owls is after we get some snow. So you can see the bokeh in the background of this is the grasses that are nicely snow covered. And again here, you know, if you take a look at my settings, it was another beautiful sunny day. You can see the nice light on this owl's face as it had just taken off from the ground. Now I thought I would share a shot where we're getting like the very last bit of light before the day is over. So you can see, you know, the sun is low. I still have that nice golden light on this owl, but you know, my settings are starting to be a little bit more manipulated here. Here is another shot of a short-eared owl with similar lighting, and it's that very last lighting of the day. It's beautiful, but you do see that I am starting to manipulate my settings at this point. And now you can see my settings are really manipulated in this shot. I don't have that nice sun hitting the owl, so I'm manipulating the settings to kind of get the light that I need. And you can see that although it's a really nice shot and the owl is looking at me, you're not going to get nearly as much detail as you do when you have the nice light on the owl. And then one more shot of even more manipulated settings. This is really my desperate setting. You know, my ISO is now at 5,000 and my shutter speed is dropped to 1,000th of a second. Again, you can see, you know, it's a nice shot. The owl's looking at me, but because I am lacking that natural light, I'm also lacking the details in the feathers of the wings. So I took all these photos a couple of years ago, and at the time that I took these, I was using my EOS 5D Mark IV with a battery grip, and I had that paired with my Canon 500mm f4, and I always use my 1.4x teleconverter, and then I also always use a carbon fiber monopod with a tilt head. And the reason I use the monopod is, one, for stability, and two, my arms won't get tired as fast, and I can shoot continuously for 15, 20, 30 minutes, and I don't have to worry about putting my arms down as I would have to if I were hand holding this big lens. When going out to shoot these raptors, some of the lenses that I recommend to people are around either Canon, Nikon, or Sony. You could either get prime lenses, which have a fixed focal length. They are a bit more expensive. Or you could get zoom lenses by Nikon, Tamron, Sigma, Sony. And these are a lot less expensive, and they also give you a different range. Some of them go from about 100 to 400 or 200 to 500. The Sony goes 200 to 600. So there are a lot of different options out there. My recommendation is to get equipment based off of your skill level, as well as what you can afford, and just do your research. Taking the photos is probably about 9/10 of the fun in doing this. The other 10th of the fun is in the post-processing. This part takes a little bit longer, and I'm often a little bit behind. But my post-processing process, I use Adobe Photoshop, Creative Cloud. Most times I am cropping my image. And the reason why I say that is because generally the owls and the hawks don't come close enough for my liking. So I do tend to crop my images. I also do tend to add a noise reduction of maybe 25 to 50%. The lower the ISO, the lower the reduction I need to do. So if it's a really nice sunny day, beautiful light, chances are I might even only do a 10% noise reduction, but I do always add a little bit. And then also sometimes I have to do temperature correction, not usually on a sunny day, but usually if it's a little bit overcast. And then I do often eliminate shadows, or I'll add in a little bit more black for an extra pop. And I like to add a little bit of the vibrant saturation. And then the big thing for me is I only shoot in RAW format. So I do have to convert every single one of my images from RAW format to JPEG. Thank you for listening to my presentation. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I hope I was able to teach you something about wintering raptors, as well as camera settings and equipment. I'll see you soon. Take care.